Today on GarageGuruTV, I'll show you how to lower your 2018 Ford Focus SEL with a set of H&R Sport Lowering Springs. Hey, this is DJ Martin and welcome to GarageGuruTV. On the last episode of GarageGuruTV, when I installed the H&R Trak Wheel Spacers on our 2018 Ford Focus SEL, I mentioned that stance and fitment are the hottest words in today's auto enthusiast market. This can be something difficult to reach with the price of suspension parts and wheel parts nowadays, so what we've been doing on this Focus is providing the budget way to get a nice fitment on your vehicle. It started with the H&R Trak Wheel Spacers, and now we're adding on the H&R Sport Lowering Springs. Let me show you what these are all about. The H&R Sport Springs are a direct replacement for your OEM coil springs. They work perfectly with your factory shocks and struts to provide you with a sporty stance with improved handling characteristics while still maintaining a comfortable ride with factory shocks. H&R has lowering springs for thousands of applications which all carry these same great features. There are about 3 different ways to lower a vehicle nowadays, and the common ways you'll hear are coilovers, bags, and lowering springs. Today we're going to be installing a set of lowering springs. But what do all the other ones mean and what are they used for? Coilovers are good if you go to the track every day and you want to see perfect times and have a lot of body control. They can run you anywhere from $1,000 upwards of $3,000 to $4,000. Bags are for the people who want to get their car into the ground and have that perfect stance, extra camber all the way around. They want to go to Stance Wars and all the big shows. Lowering springs are the most cost-effective way, and they can cost you a couple $100s. You'll get good body control. If you want to go to the autocross every once in a while, you'll have some good times, and it won't kill your ride quality when driving on the street. For this installation, you will need various ratchets and extensions, sockets ranging from 8mm to 18mm, T30 Torx bit, 5mm Allen key, 15mm wrench, torque wrench, dead blow mallet, anti-seize, coil spring compressors, a piece of sheet metal, and an impact wrench is helpful. Once you have all the tools necessary for this install, you're going to want to go ahead and set aside a morning and an afternoon because this is going to take a couple hours. So the first thing you're going to need to do is get your vehicle up in the air. We went ahead and used our quick jack so it's way up in the air and we got the wheels off the vehicle already. The next thing you're going to need to do is remove a little trim piece from under the cowl in order so you can reach the tops of the strut mounts. You're going to need a T30 Torx bit, a 10mm socket, and a flat blade screwdriver. Let me show you. There are 8 fasteners you need to remove in order to take out the little trim piece to get to the top of the strut towers. The first thing you'll need to remove is the T30 Torx screws located on either side of the cowl. Then remove this little trim piece by just scooting it around and pulling it off. Grab a 10mm socket, and there is a 10mm bolt that you will see inside of there. You'll have to remove both of those same fasteners on the other side as well. Then grab a flat blade screwdriver, and you'll need to pry under a set of clips, kind of like Christmas tree clips, in order to remove the last 4 fasteners. Repeat the process on the other side of the vehicle as well, and once all of the fasteners are out, remove the metal piece from underneath the cowl. Before you take the whole strut assembly off, you're going to have to take off a couple accessories. The first thing you'll need to do is grab an 8mm socket and remove this bracket that holds the brake hose on. Then grab a 5mm hex key and a 15mm socket and remove the top of the sway bar end link, and then unclip your ABS sensor from the strut. To remove the sway bar end link, put a wrench on the socket and then put your 5mm hex key into the end of it to hold it so it doesn't spin. With all the accessories removed from the strut, you can now take it out. You're going to need a 15mm socket, most likely some kind of impact wrench or a long ratchet. So here's the bolt that came out from the strut to hold it in. It came out from this side, so what we're going to do is take this little piece of scrap metal and sandwich it in between the two pieces of metal back here and thread this in from the other side. This will open up this little clamshell-like piece and allow us to remove the strut. The piece of metal back there. And thread it in on this side. Once the bolt makes contact with the metal, you'll only give it a few turns. You don't want to open this up too wide because you want to still be able to screw it in when you're putting your strut back in. Once you have the strut free at the bottom, it doesn't need to come all the way out, but as long as you can move it around and wiggle it, this is the point where you need to come to the top and grab a 13mm socket, remove the 3 top strut bolts. With the 3 top strut bolts out, now you just need to kind of gorilla it out of there. A good way to help with this is to put a lug nut on one of your lug studs, stand on it, it'll pull it down, and you can pull the strut out. The next step, once you have the strut off of your vehicle, is you're going to need to compress the spring. In order to compress the spring, you can go down to your local O'Reilly Auto Parts and they will rent you out for free a spring compressor. If you look, it's basically just a set of clamps that when you tighten down on this socket right here, it'll squeeze these together and pull these coils closer together. You have to be careful when doing this. You want to be careful where you set them and make sure everything's very secure so these don't go shooting, because these will shoot across the room faster than you can imagine. And once I'm done with that, I'll remove the top nut, take off the strut tower top, and then I'll install the new H&R springs. We now have the H&R Lowering Springs installed on our factory struts, and now we're going to install it into the car. At the top of the strut, you're going to need to look where the little nub is on this little piece, and that goes to the inside of the vehicle, and it won't fit any other way, so make sure you get that correct. We went ahead and put some anti-seize on the inside of the spindle assembly so it'll aid our installation. First thing we need to do is put it inside the strut tower. It's just going to be a lot of kind of wrestling it around to get it in there. It looks like it's all the way in. With the strut seated in the spindle, the next thing you're going to need to do is remove the bolt and the plate that we used to open up the clamshell. Install the bolt onto the other side of the spindle and torque it to 60 foot-pounds. Now that the knuckle bolt is tightened to 60 foot-pounds, we're now going to put a floor jack underneath the lower control arm, jack up the entire strut and lower control arm and all those pieces into the strut tower, and then I'm going to start the bolts and then torque those to 25 foot-pounds. Reinstall the upper part of the sway bar in link with the ABS sensor bracket. Next, clip the sensor wire to the strut. Lastly, reinstall the brake hose bracket with the 8mm bolt. The rear spring install is much less involved than the front. All you need is a 15mm socket, and you're going to remove the 15mm bolt for the lower control arm. You'll also want to support this with a jack so that when you lower it down, the spring doesn't go flying. So sadly, it's not just a one bolt installation. You do have to remove the sway bar end links in order to get the control arm to drop low enough to let the spring out. We have a 5mm Allen key going into the top of the bolt, and then a 15mm wrench, and you put that in the top so it doesn't spin. So we're going to remove it now. Lower the control arm off of the floor jack and remove the rear coil spring. Transfer the rubber isolator from the original spring on the top to the new H&R spring on the top as well. Make sure the pigtail lines up in the notch and that it is seated correctly. Put the new H&R Sport spring in between the upper spring mount and the lower control arm. Make sure the lower pigtail aligns in the lower control arm so the installation is correct. Lastly, jack up the lower control arm, reinstall the lower control arm bolt and torque it to 60 foot-pounds, and reinstall your sway bar end links. The H&R Sport Springs are now installed on a 2018 Ford Focus SEL, and everything is torqued to spec apart from the lug nuts, which we'll do once it's on the ground. The front knuckle bolts are torqued to 60 foot-pounds, the tops of the strut towers are 25 foot-pounds, and the rear control arm bolts are 60 foot-pounds. Next, all we have to do is reinstall this cowl piece and install all the hardware, and we're done and we're getting this on the road. With the metal panel reinstalled under the cowl, reinstall the 4 pushpin style clips, the 2 T30 Torx bolts, the 2 10mm bolts, and the covers. Torque your lug nuts to the factory spec once the vehicle is on the ground. The H&R Sport Springs are now on our 2018 Ford Focus SEL. In the front, it lowered it about 1.2 inches, and in the back, it lowered it about 1.3 inches, just as quoted from H&R. Our setup on the whole vehicle is 20mm spacer in the front and 25mm Trak Plus spacer in the rear with the H&R Sport Springs. It's a perfectly flush fitment, and it looks amazing. If you want to see what HR has for your vehicle, check out hrsprings.com. Thank you for tuning in to Garage Guru TV. I'll see you next time.